Hello and welcome to PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale History, where today we'll be looking at a more villainous character than usual, Sweet Tooth, aka Marcus Needles Kane from Twisted Metal. Originally a launch title for the first PlayStation, Twisted Metal became a long-running vehicular combat series, a genre that was particularly popular in the 90s for some reason. Driving an assortment of weird and wonderful vehicles loaded up with missiles, mines and a variety of other weapons, the objective of these titles was simple: kill everyone before they could kill you. The series centered on a tournament called Twisted Metal, run by a mysterious, enigmatic man named Calypso, who had the power to grant people's wishes. In every run of the contest, Calypso granted the wishes of the winner, but often he'd twist their wishes into something they didn't really want. Marcus Kane, aka Needles Kane, was one of the contestants. He was a psychotic serial killer dressed as a clown with a flaming head, whose vehicle of choice was an ice cream truck named Sweet Tooth. Over the course of the series, Sweet Tooth also became another alias for Mr. Kane himself. He also swiftly became the series' mascot, with either him or his truck appearing on the cover of every single game, and with him becoming the leader of the tournament in the fourth game in the series. The series consisted of 4 games for the PS1, a PS2 sequel, a PSP spin-off, and a reboot for the PS3. It's this reboot that inspired much of Sweet Tooth's appearance, moves and personality in PlayStation All-Stars. Being such an iconic figure in a long-running Sony franchise, it was inevitable that he would turn up. But here's the catch. Twisted Metal was a vehicular combat game. Sweet Tooth was never playable outside of some kind of vehicle, so how on earth did he get translated to PlayStation All-Stars? Well, I guess we better find out then. In the cutscenes of Twisted Metal 2012, we witness Sweet Tooth as a serial killer, on his quest to kill as many people as possible, starting with his own family. His weapon of choice for killing his victims was a jagged machete, which he wielded in many of these scenes, using it to stab, maim or gouge anyone who got in his way. In one cutscene, he also threw the machete at an escaping victim. Although this weapon wasn't usable in actual gameplay, they incorporated it into his PlayStation All-Stars moveset. Sweet Tooth uses it as part of a dual hit combo, and will also swing it while in the air. It's also possible for Sweet Tooth to throw his machete, just like in the previously mentioned cutscene. In actual gameplay in the Twisted Metal games, one of the simplest ways to do damage to your opponents in any situation was to ram them with your vehicle. This was obviously more effective for heavily armoured vehicles such as the huge truck Darkside or the light tank called Warthog, but other vehicles could still do damage. They were just also likely to take a lot of damage themselves in the process. The Sweet Tooth ice cream truck had some reasonable armour and so could do some pretty nice ramming damage, although the slow speed of the truck meant that it was often difficult to build up a lot of power behind the ram. This is possibly the inspiration for Sweet Tooth's shoulder charge move, where he rams into his opponents with his shoulder. It's also possibly the inspiration for his downward shockwave move, which is basically a ram but downwards. This may also be the inspiration for Sweet Tooth's other melee moves too, since both the Jawbreaker and the Shinbreaker moves are just heavy hitting moves with no direct equivalent from the original games. One of the more iconic things about Sweet Tooth was his flaming head. The only explanation ever given for this was in Twisted Metal Black, which stated that the flames were a curse given to him in punishment for his crimes. However, this game wasn't in the same timeline as other games in the series, so it's not applicable across the board. However, the iconic nature of his flames means that Sweet Tooth needed some fire-based moves in PlayStation All-Stars, but there's a bit more to it than that. One item you could pick up in the Twisted Metal games was a napalm weapon, or sometimes a gas can, which could be chucked out and detonated, setting things ablaze. There was also a car in the reboot called Crimson Fury, whose special weapon was a flamethrower that would shoot a continuous stream of fire. These combined aspects appear to be the inspiration for Sweet Tooth's many fire moves. The flamethrower move appears to have inspired the Hellfire Breath move, while the napalm appears to be the inspiration for the Molotov cocktail. Other fire-based moves seem to be based entirely on Sweet Tooth's flaming head. One common weapon throughout the games was a landmine that you could drop behind your vehicle to damage an opponent who was chasing you. In the reboot, this became one of the energy weapons that you always had equipped, along with a shield and a special missile. Mine was pretty self-explanatory. You dropped it behind your vehicle, anyone who drove over it took damage as it exploded. Sweet Tooth also gets a mine in PlayStation All-Stars and it works largely the same. Drop it somewhere and leave it for some unsuspecting soul to walk over it and have it explode in their face. Another recurring weapon throughout the series was the shotgun, which appears in 2 forms in Twisted Metal 2012. The first was a normal pickup, usually found fairly commonly throughout the levels, and the other was an unlockable sidearm that replaced the normal machine gun you'd have by default. Both shotguns were fairly powerful weapons that did a lot of damage, but were only really effective up close. pretty much like any shotguns in any normal game then really. The shotgun was also an easy weapon to hand to Sweet Tooth in PlayStation All-Stars, and this gives him two moves. The first is a simple shotgun blast ahead of him, while the other is a blast aimed at opponents' feet designed to knock them to the floor. Each character in Twisted Metal had a specific vehicle. Originally, picking a character picked your vehicle too, although the reboot introduced a new system where you'd pick a character and a vehicle separately and reduce the number of characters to just 3. This allowed Sweet Tooth to use the Reaper, which was the iconic vehicle for Mr. Grimm, a skull-faced gang member that you could also play as. The special weapon for the Reaper was the chainsaw, which could be chucked about, doing as much damage as you'd expect a wild chainsaw chucked by a guy on a motorcycle to do. Sometimes it was tricky to aim it, but it was still a pretty nice weapon that did a lot of damage. Sweet Tooth also gains this chainsaw in PlayStation All-Stars, and instead of chucking it, Sweet Tooth will now spin around in a circle with the chainsaw on, acting as a crowd control move. Now there's no montage this time, so let's move straight to the supers.
Level 1!
Another weapon you could obtain in the Twisted Metal games was a sticky bomb. As you'd expect, this bomb could be fired at opponents to stick to them wherever they went. The bomb could be removed by ramming into other opponents, which was useful if someone stuck a bomb to you, but not so useful if your opponent stuck the bomb you gave them back onto you. This is a likely inspiration for Sweet Tooth's Level 1 Super in PlayStation All-Stars, where Sweet Tooth sticks a bit of TNT to his opponent and kicks them away. But hang on, TNT? That's completely different. What's all that about? Okay, TNT was never really a weapon in Twisted Metal. The only time it ever really appeared was in the final boss fight of Sweet Tooth's storyline, where he used TNT to bust open the boss's armor. Well, he didn't. He used a lackey who he then left to die in the explosion, because that's the kind of guy Sweet Tooth was. These two things combined appear to be the full inspiration for Sweet Tooth Level 1, with the TNT taken from the boss fight and the sticky bomb aspect taken from the remote bomb weapon in-game.
Level 2!
Twisted Metal games were all about the missiles. The majority of weapons you could pick up were missiles of some kind, whether it was the basic homing missile or a fire missile that acted similar to napalm. There was also the power missile, which was capable of causing a lot of damage, but it wasn't as good at tracking opponents. But missiles went even more extreme in the reboot. A special multiplayer mode, which also featured in one of the game's boss fights, allows you to strap rival drivers to a nuke and steer it about. In the multiplayer mode, this allowed you to destroy rival players' bases, while in single player this was just one of the phases in taking down the boss. These two things combined seem to be the inspiration for Sweet Tooth's Level 2 in PlayStation All-Stars. The use of a missile seems to reference the series love of missiles in general, and the fact you can control its movement seems to echo the nuke mode of the reboot.
Level 3!
So I mentioned the Reaper having a special chainsaw move, but what of Sweet Tooth's own truck? Well, aside from a special move that saw the creepy clown head on top shoot out and chase down opponents, there was another special move. By pressing the triangle button, the truck would transform, becoming a gigantic mecha clown of doom. Even though it walked around, it still basically handled like a truck, but the stompy nature of it made it more deadly. The Sweet Bot, as it was named, could continue firing a machine gun, but could also fire its head as a missile. It could also take flight, allowing you to slam back down onto the ground. Another transforming mech appeared in Twisted Metal Black, where Sweet Tooth's truck could turn into a weird robo-clown that could fire a barrage of missiles, although it wasn't quite as varied as the Sweet Bot. The Sweet Bot is Sweet Tooth's Level 3, which stomps about the stage, able to fire the machine gun as it normally would, and can also perform a stomp move that references the slam from its flying abilities. Its ability to fire a barrage of missiles may be a direct reference to the special move in Black. Now I'm not going to talk about the music for Sweet Tooth's Level 3 because that'll be covered in another video, so I guess we'll call it a day for now, and I'll see you next time with a Sweet Tooth related stage. Which one? I guess you'll have to wait and see. Stay tuned.